Happy Scientist podcast. Each episode is designed to make you more focused, more productive, and more satisfied in the lab. You can find us online at bitesizebio.com/happy scientist. Your hosts are Kenneth Vogt, founder of the executive coaching firm Vera Claritas, and Dr. Nick Oswald, PhD, bioscientist, and founder of Bitesize Bio.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Happy Scientist podcast. This is the place to be if you want to become a happier, healthier and more productive scientist. I'm Nick Oswald, the founder of bitesizebio.com, and today we will be drawing again on the wisdom of Mr. Kenneth Vogt, the Bitesize Bio team coach and the founder of the executive mentoring company Vera Claritas. Today and in all other Happy Scientist podcast episodes, you get to benefit from Ken's Yoda-like words of wisdom to help you increase your performance, enjoyment and success in the lab. Today we will be discussing an interesting question. Can there be freedom in science, or in a career in science to be exact? Okay, Ken, so maybe we'd be best to start off with, what are you defining as freedom in this context?
Yes, freedom is kind of a loaded word these days. And there's a bunch of different, call them applications out in the world, but let's just start with what the basic concept is, and then we'll talk about how it applies in science and how it applies in your career. So the freedom I'm talking about is the power or right to act, speak, or think as one wants without hindrance or restraint. So there's several components there that are worth thinking about. One is that you have the power to be free. You have the right to be free. It impacts your actions, your speech, and your thinking. And it involves the removal of hindrance or restraint. So when you couple all that in there and you think about your day-to-day work or your week-to-week or month-to-month work, you might have heard a lot of barriers there to your freedom. That's not how it is. You may feel disempowered. You may feel like you're not afforded any kind of rights. Your actions or speech might be hindered, even your thinking. And
even out of the victim story of that, out with the victim story of that science has naturally got a lot of structure. A lot of ways you're on rails the way you've to think as a scientist, and so I guess in one way you could call that restriction of freedom of sorts.
Yeah, and we can talk about how you can still be free even within a structure, but I wanted to start off by talking about what are the barriers, what is in your way that's keeping you from being able to do the most amazing, the most innovative science out there. And it dawned on me there are quite a few barriers to that, and I imagine Nick will be able to chime in on even more, or at least more detail on these. But
let's see.
Yeah. So I wanted to start off with, and I started thinking about this in terms of where are the first places where your freedom gets restricted in science, and the thing that floated to the top for me is academia. That is, there are silos of knowledge that are very specific, and then there are call it philosophies of science, for which there are living proponents that are often professors, and boy, you do it their way, or you're not allowed to do anything. So that might be the first area we think of when it comes to freedom. So now, that's not to say that every one of these folks out there are tyrants and they won't allow you to think outside the box. It's just that they've put so much effort into developing their box, and they're so proud of it, and they so want you to understand it, which would be beneficial because, these are the people that have gone ahead of you and have figured some things out. But you can find yourself cast into that mold and not able to see outside of it. So So, Nick, I'll ask you, is there anything you want to weigh in there when it comes to academia?
Yeah, it's interesting because I guess we're talking about, we're kind of inferring that a lack of freedom here is a bad thing, and sometimes it's a necessary thing, and sometimes it's, if you're talking about creative freedom or intellectual freedom, you want to be able to exert your influence. But one thing that strikes me is it's easy to say, those old guys or girls have got it all, sewn up. They make the, decide how this is going to go, and we have to follow. But I think that's an easy thing to jump to, but it's not necessarily a valid criticism, because a lot of what we're doing there is we're building on the work of others, and so we're building on the philosophies of others. If we start from scratch with every generation of new generation of scientists, then we don't make progress.
Well, that's
But
very
that
true.
doesn't
Science is all
that
about building on the past.
yeah, and so that doesn't mean that the past shouldn't be questioned, of course. And I always say that you can't just assume, but it doesn't also doesn't mean you can just throw the past and the knowledge and the structure out of the window and expect to still have. You might have more freedom, but you have less structure to build upon. So it's going to take much longer to move forward.
Right. So, just a couple of things I want to back up a little and just make sure we understand here. The title of this is "Can there be freedom in science?" It's not about should there be freedom, or is how come there's no freedom in science. Yeah, and what I'm talking about here, what I'm calling the barriers, they are barriers to there being freedom, but it doesn't mean that they serve no purpose, or that freedom should be the end all and be all. Free range scientists gets us Dr. No. We don't need that.
Interesting. I'm thinking, not that we change the title of this, because this is how we started out, but another way to frame this is, where is the freedom in science?
Sure.
Where can you exert you on science within that structure?
Exactly. So I want to tick off a few more things that might be the restrictions on your freedom in science. And again, we're discussing these things not to make them the bad. They're not the bad guys. It's just realizing what's the lay of the land and seeing what's there. So the second one I would point to is money. Money has very much influenced how science progresses these days. It's all about, can I get the grant? How much can I get for the grant? What restrictions come with the grant? And what requirements do they expect the people who are giving me the money, are giving us the money? So money becomes a big deal, and that almost sounds dirty, like it's filthy lucre. But money is a necessity in this game. There's the things that you do in the lab, they're expensive. So I'll throw that one back to you, Nick. What do you think about money when it comes to freedom?
It's an interesting one. I must be. It's my birthday today. This must be a pivotal year, because now I'm thinking. A lot of the things that I would have said as a young man about that, I'm kind of changing my angle on a little bit. So this must be the moment. But anyway, one way to look at the money is that, of course, it restricts a bit like those, philosophies or the rules or whatever, the old guard, that sort of thing. The money restricts where the science goes, because there's limited resource, and because that resource is to be channeled into what some body of some sort decides is the most important thing that needs funding, so that it's an allocation of the resource. So that does hinder your creative freedom as a scientist to what you want to explore in one way. I think the danger is when we, as scientists, become too fixed on that, and people start to play the game, do science to get money. You have to kind of, there is a necessary restriction, but you have to play as if there's no restriction, if you see what I mean. if this result would get, it's that whole thing. If this result would get you the breakthrough that would give you the $10 million grant, well, you can't focus on that, because you're going to like blur your judgment. You're going to tend towards that result. That's just your natural human nature, and so you have to be Spock-like and step back and let it happen. So, in a way, yeah, it's a funny one, money there, isn't it? Because it provides provides a restriction, a barrier, as you said, on one side, but on the other side, you've got to make sure that you guard yourself against being sucked into that vortex yourself and still be a scientist, even though there's money involved.
Right. So the idea then is can you be free even though there are monetary shackles on you? It's a question to ponder.
It's monetary magnets more than shackles.
Interesting.
You know what I mean? For me, I think anyway, it's the money will tend to pull you in a direction, and you have to be immune to that.
I like that. I like that. Yeah, 'cause that's a lot of these barriers. They aren't going to feel so awful. They're not, cold hard steel handcuffs. They are soft and fuzzy. They're warm and embracing sometimes, and it's easy to just get caught up in them and not even notice them anymore. You don't even realize you're restricted because you've drank the Kool-Aid.
I mean, it's not even restricted. Obviously, none of these are restricted to science. But it's like, if you're just talking about pure creative expression, which is what you want to, I would say is the primary freedom here in a way. If you look at the music industry, it's like you all know artists that have got immense talent, that if they just did what what came from the heart sort of thing, then they would make great music, but they sold out. And they went for the poppy stuff that was just meh, but they know it would sell, like that. And it's not an exact parallel, but it's something like that. It's like, just be the guy or person who just goes in there and does it for the love, even though the money is around, and let the money happen.
Well, the other thing about that though too is that phrase "selling out" that's so popular to think of in reference to music. Some people, they're making a living. They're making a living, and they're making people happy when they do it. Yes, they're not trying to be Mozart, but they're making music, and they're good at it, and people like what they do, and so there's nothing wrong with that. And the same thing is true in science. If you're following up with some grants that are very popular topics, there's nothing wrong with that. That is not a lack of freedom. In fact, you were free to make the choice to I'll pursue that. Or you might decide, I want to pursue something that's a little harder to get funding for. Well, then, you're free to do that. You can make that choice. You just have to be aware of what are the potential restrictions. What are the things that might stand in the way.
Yeah, this is an interesting topic, and it's an interesting that the title is a question. And it's not necessarily that either of us knows the answer to this.
Right. Sure.
We're kind of pushing back and forward to find out where the middle ground is.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's interesting. Okay.
So the next one I think is, I don't want to say it's unique to science, but it is uniquely important in science, and that's ethics. Ethics can very much restrict what you can or can't do, and where you draw the line becomes very important. So, like, for instance, I'll use an example of using animals in research, using mice and rabbits and primates or whatever it is for bioresearch. Some folks have a terrible time with that. Other folks see it as absolutely a worthwhile trade-off for the sake of human life. And then there's all kinds of variations in between. But it does put some velvet ropes around you of what you can and cannot do, or what you can be so public about. And sometimes that's a restriction. Maybe it's like, we can do it, we just can't talk about it, and not being able to talk about it is a real hampering of our research. So what do you think about that, Nick?
Well, there's also not being able to talk about it, but it might be scientifically interesting to see whether you could clone a human being, but it's not a thing you should probably try.
Sure.
As well. So there's those,
and it's been done. So or at least it's claimed to have been done. So, and it's caused a stir.
Yeah, but I mean, there's all sorts of research that there are all sorts of experiments that could be done and would be scientifically interesting, but are just not ethical. If you like, I'm trying to remember what these were now. There was, one during the COVID sort of early days of the COVID, and the idea was you can't test for efficacy of masks in preventing the user from getting infection. What was it? Because you would then have to have a controlled trial where you were exposing people knowingly without or potentially.
Well, it's like, there's a very current and big deal that's happening, and now what? And I think back to like experiments that were done during the Nazi era. Well, guess what? They collected some data. Maybe those experiments never should have been done, but should we ignore what's been learned? That's a tough ethical question. So, and again,
Well, I mean, if you're thinking about, freedom in science, then one way to look at it as well is, I would like this, this scientific, this answer to this question would be useful to our species, sort of thing, or to Earth or whatever, and I would like to answer it, but there's some of those questions you can't answer without hurting people or putting people at risk or whatever.
Yeah, or hurting other species.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a restriction.
Yeah. So again, this is, if we go back to that original definition, this is about what you think or speak about or act on. And maybe you're making choices here that where you're bowing to what other people think rather than what you think. Maybe you don't see a problem. And maybe that's not you don't see a problem, I want to put it that way. Maybe you're certain there is no problem, and you feel that the masses are being overly restrictive, often out of ignorance even. And that impacts your science. So the question is, well, what will you do so as to exercise your freedom? Will you be a champion for something? Will you make it a point of educating people on it so that they can understand why you're making a choice that is ethical? Those are all things that pop up when it comes to how your freedom will be exercised.
That's a very thorny question.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get off these ugly ones and get into something a little more friendly here. Technology can be a restriction to freedom. Well, how? And that the technology doesn't exist to do what you'd like to do. Obviously technology is moving forward and it's fantastic, but sometimes you find yourself just not being able to do what you wish you could have done. And I'm thinking about, before CRISPR existed, how many scientists found their freedom restricted because they just couldn't do what you can do with CRISPR, and there are plenty of things, dreams for technology that do not yet exist. And you got to do your research in the world that exists today, not the world that's going to exist tomorrow.
Well, then you have the freedom to try and create the technology, which is what a lot of people have done.
Well, that's true. That's true. Well, this is an interesting thing too. In some ways, a lot of this technology is the creation of engineers rather than scientists, although they certainly need input from scientists. And sometimes there are things that they need groups of people that are both engineers and scientists because either group alone couldn't do it. And then there are cases where, only a scientist could develop this next technology. So,
Well, it's a whole different way of being a scientist. I have worked in a company that was like that, where we were engineers, software engineers, scientists, all sorts of different things, and that was great fun. But it's not the same as academic research, obviously.
Well, I think about things like flow cytometry and microscopy that amass gigantic amounts of data, and now we need software to process that data, and you need statisticians to make sense of that data. A whole other realms are opened up, and as a scientist, you need the freedom to recognize there may be other areas of knowledge where you need help, you need feedback, and maybe you need education. Maybe you need to get up to speed on it. Okay, here's another interesting one. Popularity. Popularity can be a real barrier because some things just aren't popular. Nobody cares. Nobody wants the answer to that question that you find so interesting.
Having studied slime molds for 4 years, it was very interesting, and a lot of people do find it interesting, and it's fundamental. So,
Well, it's
anyway.
funny. I honestly had never heard of slime mold until one day you mentioned that was what you got your PhD in, and I thought, how on earth did this guy get a PhD into something that I've never even heard of? And I started looking into it, and it's like, wow, it is kind of interesting, and
It's very interesting.
yeah, so
It is good for parties, though. It is one of the conversation stoppers.
right. So yeah, but well, there's something that's an interesting thought. Did you have to overcome any barriers of a lack of popularity for this, or was it more understood
no.
in the scientific realm?
No, it's very established.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
it's very established. Yeah.
Well, that's cool. But that's not always the case. Sometimes even in scientific realms, you're that voice in the wilderness, and that can be a barrier. Okay, well, then the last one I had to bring up because it's come to light here in the last few years. Politics gets in the way of science. Like, who would have ever thought that was going to be the case? But now it has become this thing where that your scientific view is based on whether or not you're liberal or conservative. It's crazy.
I'm increasingly feeling that as soon as science science leaks out of the sort of, not leaks, but it moves beyond the sort of confines of scientific discourse sort of thing, and it starts as touching the media and then into politics and stuff. It's just it's impossible to control what's done with that, and that's an interesting
Well,
thing in
we
itself,
did an episode on that.
quite a fun.
We talked about science versus scientific opinion and how to discuss it in the world. So we should point people back to that. Check out that episode. And Nick had a lot to say in that episode, so it was a good one.
Yeah, I think my view on it's getting more and more dim, sadly, at the moment. Hopefully it comes back, but that it's kind of like there's actually no way to really do it well. There's not well, pristinely. It's always going to be tainted as soon as it goes. The media can't handle that sort of stuff very well, as far as I can see, anyway. But anyway, who knows? That's another.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's obviously people enter politics coming from all kinds of different realms, including science, because they see something they just feel there is no other way to deal with it than to go political, and but that impacts your freedom in what you can do as a scientist. So, there we go. So, enough about the barriers. Let's talk about the sources of freedom, the things that you can draw on where you can be free. And by the way, being free feels wonderful. It's great. Freedom is a very, very desirable state. And when it's applied, it can be exciting.
So I my sort of first sort of inkling there is freedom feels great. What sort of do you mean? Am I standing in a field and I can run wherever I want? Am I, is it, or whatever? But actually, for me, what we're defining here is the freedom to be the kind of scientist you wanted to be. The thing that drove you from the beginning to go into science, and then
and the freedom to accomplish the
going.
things that you hope to accomplish as a scientist.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not just about a state of mind, but it's about the practical outcome of you being what you came to the table to be. Came to the bench to be. So a couple of things that you can use that will help you. Now,
before you go on, the episode about differentiating between science and scientific opinion, that was episode 16. I just found out.
Episode 16. Okay, we'll get that added to the show notes too. So, all right. So, first thing I would point out is one of the things that can help promote freedom for you personally. These are tools you can use, and you will have to actualize. If you're waiting for freedom to be handed to you from somewhere outside of you, forget it. You already have it. It's an inalienable right, as it were.
However, but you can wait for somebody to hand it to you. You can follow someone. You can follow the course that someone else sets for you, but that's not freedom. That's not being your own person, your own scientist within the structure. Yeah.
Yeah, and by the way, there's nothing wrong with that.
Exactly.
We're not saying that you have to be this personal, individual beacon of freedom. You can be. It's an option. And if you're not, that's fine. And there's gradations here. This is a continuum. But it's probably not going to be so great if you have no freedom. If all you're doing is punching a clock every day, you might as well be making widgets at the factory.
Yeah, again, it depends on what kind of thing you want to do. Well, if you take it back to what kind of scientist do you want to be, you might want to be a scientist who goes in and does routine, and that in some places that's what it is.
Yeah, and it's necessary,
and that's absolutely fine. That's absolutely fine, and that's then you can be your requirement for freedom, like personal freedom, to be the scientist you want to be, as much as less, but you're still getting what you wanted, so that's okay.
Well, you may be getting freedom in your own life. The fact you may be
exactly.
able to do that kind of work and make a better living than to be in a same kind of work that's not scientific, that doesn't require the kind of education you have.
So I guess what we're talking about is kind of the extreme, the extreme end of it. Want to be the person who the kind of scientist who needs the most freedom to express themselves. If we're talking about that person, then we're talking about we address what's needed for every other level below that.
Yeah,
or it's not
yeah,
below.
Yeah, below's not the right word. That is less concerned with that. And you may be listening to this and going, you know what, I don't really want that much freedom in this, and that is a perfectly fine position to take. But there are others of you who are going, man, I feel like I have got, just the cuffs on me at all times. I feel like I'm in a cage all the time. Well, I'm going to try and help you get out of that. So one of the things you can do that you can apply is rigor. We've talked about scientific rigor, but using your capability, using your power of reason, really getting engaged in what you're doing will give you more freedom, because you will see things that others don't even know are there, and that's where the freedom is. So it is, all the restrictions can still be there. May not those restricting you may not realize the world's available to you within the restrictions they put on you, and that rigor will help you find more freedom. So another thing that might apply to this that could relate to that is having passion about something. If you really care about a particular topic, you're going to find more possibilities. You're gonna feel less restraint and less hindrance because you're excited about it and you're engaged in it, and the details are exciting to you and matter to you. And passion is something that can get applied in a lot of places, and I think a lot of folks may not think of science and passion in the same breath, but those people aren't scientists. But you know better. There's plenty of opportunity for passion within science. Another thing that is, I won't say unique to science, but is definitely one of its best principles, is curiosity is really important in science. And when you have curiosity, that's where you start to see your options expand. And options expanding is synonymous to freedom. And when you're curious about things, you'll see things that others won't see. And you will find rabbit holes to go down. and that's great, because sometimes those things really pay off. And of course, you're not doing it necessarily for a particular payoff, but because going down rabbit holes is interesting. And every once in a while, something commercially viable comes out of it, or something medically important comes out of it, or something that changes our view of fundamentals comes out of it. So, and that's still happening. This didn't all end with Isaac Newton or Pascal. We keep discovering new things that make us have to rethink how the world works, and that's awesome. And you're the ones who are discovering it.
It's interesting that we're talking about the barriers there. What you're talking about is it's almost like you're defining the space that's available to grow as a scientist, right? Here's the edges, right? And then as you talk about these, the sources of freedom, one way to look at that is it's the muscles you can flex to fill that space. And so if you come in as a scientist and you don't show rigor, then you're not going to develop properly as a scientist. People won't trust you so much. You won't get so many opportunities and You'll restrict yourself to being a particular kind of scientist, maybe, or more prevent yourself from being another type of scientist. One that whose data can actually be trusted. Maybe if you're not rigorous. Rigor is kind of a fundamental. But again, passion, that's maybe a better one, because if you come in and you're passionate and you display passion, that you're looking for opportunities. And again, that's what curiosity really is as well. You're excited, you're looking for opportunities. Then when the space is available, you will move into it as a presence within this scientific community, and that your influence will grow, and then that will help you to occupy the space that is available. So I think that's a good way to think about these, that the barriers are here's where you can't, or it's more difficult to move, but the spaces in between all this stuff, you can move it by flexing these muscles.
Right. And we all know of people that are doing that. And now some of these people are, that you happen to know because you've encountered them in your work. And others, they've risen to public fame in some cases because they have that infectious enthusiasm for what they're doing, and they're excited about discovery, and again, the freedom that's been afforded them now is fantastic, and you can be that too. Now, not everybody's got to end up on TV, if that's not something you want, that's fine. But imagine some of you are thinking that'd be pretty cool. I'd like to be on the talk show circuit. I'd like to have my book on the hitting the New York Times bestseller list. Great. If you could do that, go for it. Because you do have the freedom to do that, because it's being done. You have models out there you could follow. So that leads to the next thing I was thinking about, and this has to do with creativity. When you exhibit creativity, you find new opportunities. You find new things to do. In some cases, you find new applications for the science that already exists or that you discover. In other cases, you find whole new areas of science to examine. And even in my lifetime, there have been whole new areas of science that have just been created out of whole cloth, that they didn't even exist before, and now they're a thing. Now they're a field. And in some cases, they're things that were dismissed before, and now they've been accepted. So you just never know what your creativity might foster. And this kind of leads into the next thing I was thinking about too, is the opportunity for cooperation. When you find other people that are like-minded and you team up with them, new possibilities get created. You can be part of a movement. Now maybe you started that movement, maybe you've joined that movement, but you can be part of it. And there's a lot of benefit to be gained by cooperation in science. I think science is one of the beacons in human society for cooperation. Because the freedom to spread information is beautiful. And like the whole internet exists because of the interest of sharing scientific information. So that's it doesn't matter what it's devolved into, it's still sharing scientific information.
You mean science is responsible for Facebook? You're not selling it.
Well, just because it's got a few warts on it doesn't mean that underneath the body isn't sound.
Fair enough.
So that does kind of lead into the last thing I was thinking about. I mentioned technology as being a barrier, but technology is also a source of freedom. Look at the things you can do today because of technology. Look what you can do thanks to CRISPR, what you can do thanks to flow cytometry, what you can do thanks to PCR. I mean, it's amazing what you can do now that 100 years ago scientists couldn't even dream about.
I love it that you reel off these names now, like you.
Look, I know what I'm talking about.
I didn't want to say that, but yeah, I mean that is. I guess all of these have always been in science: rigor, passion, curiosity, creativity, and cooperation. But technology is what has kind of gone exponential in the last 40 years or maybe more.
Yeah, Marie Curie didn't
this,
have all that.
yeah. But they certainly had to have rigor and passion and curiosity and so on. And so it's interesting that as you kind of, one trap is that as you kind of move more towards the technology side of things.
Yeah, don't forget those fundamentals.
Exactly. Don't forget the rigor and the passion and the curiosity. It's easy
when I say Marie Curie didn't have those things, I meant technological things. So obviously, she had all the rest.
Exactly, yeah. But that's the thing. In the beginning, that's all you have is rigor and passion and curiosity. And, like if you go back to the beginning of science, which was...
Well, you think about the beginning of your own scientific interest. When you were in fourth grade, you didn't have technology to do anything. It all just came down to you got interested, and maybe it didn't happen in third grade. Maybe it happened in 12th grade. Maybe it happened by the time you hit university. I don't know. But it happened at some point because nobody gets a PhD in science without having decided to have some interest in it. It doesn't come automatic. That's for sure.
True. Yeah.
So
it's interesting.
So those are my thoughts on freedom. And so, Nick, is there anything else you wanted to add there?
No, I just think, I kind of said it earlier, but just to reiterate that again, what we're saying about freedom, what is freedom? It's about expressing yourself as a scientist, whatever kind of scientist you want to be, and that will be different for different people, and different people will need more ability to move within the structures that exist in science than others, depending on what kind of scientist they want to be. The barriers that you laid out there, academia, money, ethics, technology, popularity, and politics, represent the edges or the areas of space that either can't be filled by you as a scientist or are more difficult for you to fill as a scientist. But within that, you can grow. Within that space that's available, within that constraint that's available, there's plenty of room to grow. There's infinite room to grow, really. And the way to do it is by flexing those muscles, those attributes, paying attention to them and cultivating them within yourself. Rigor, passion, curiosity, creativity, and cooperation and technology. What can you do to improve that in those muscles, those attributes in yourself? What can you do to exercise those more? There's always more ways to be more rigorous, to be more curious, to be more creative. And then, as we said in the end, the technology is always advancing. So that you have to keep abreast of that, and that helps you to exercise more creative freedom. But never forget the things at the beginning of that list: the rigor, the passion, curiosity, and so on, are easy to let fall by the wayside, especially if you start. Well, they're easy to let fall by the wayside. They're the fundamentals. So I think that was very interesting. Actually, that went a different way from I thought. We started off with a question and some bullet points, and that.
Well, I love it when we start these things off with me going, Nick, this time you're gonna have to weigh in. You're like, whoa, thanks for the heads up.
Yeah, I don't know that I did weigh in that much, but
you did. You did indeed.
I see what you mean here, and I think it's a really useful map. It's quite a lot to chew on, but it's a really useful map for people to explore what kind of scientists they want to be and what do they need to exercise more to grow in that. Again, if you allow your rigor or your passion to atrophy, then you're just going to stop growing as a scientist. You will stop growing, regardless of what technology you have at your disposal or what money you have at your disposal. So, it's yeah. Okay, I think that was a great topic, Ken. So thanks for conceiving that. I hope that helps a lot of people. So I think just a couple of housekeeping things to say before we head off is the usual message that you can see all of the episodes at all the previous episodes at bitesizebio.com/The Happy Scientist. And as I mentioned, as will be in the show notes there on Bitesize Bio /The Happy Scientist, then one episode that we mentioned there, the challenge of differentiating between science and scientific opinion. If you're interested in that was episode 16. You can find that back there at that URL. And if you're interested in this stuff, if it floats your boat, then we are at facebook.com/The Happy Scientist Club, all one word. And we would love to see a like from you there and a message from you there and to say hi. And that just leaves us to say, Ken, thank you very much.
Thank you
for another great insight that I'm sure a lot of people will find useful. And I'm off to celebrate the rest of my birthday.
All right.
All right. Thanks, Ken. Take care.
Okay, bye now.
Bye.
The Happy Scientist is brought to you by Bitesize Bio, your mentor in the lab. Bitesize Bio features thousands of articles and webinars contributed by hundreds of PhD scientists and scientific companies who freely offer their hard-won wisdom and solutions to the Bitesize Bio community.